I think the great secret is that the scripts were very good, and they were very good, I think, for two reasons. One is, for a start, that there was an awful lot in them. The average BBC half hour, 65 pages. Fawlty Towers, we used to do 135 to 140 pages. We literally did twice as many. Camera cuts, average shows got 200. We used to have 400 camera cuts. So there was an enormous amount in it. The other thing is they were very well constructed, and what Connie and I discovered worked for us was that we never really started to write the dialogue until we got the plot worked out. So we would spend sometimes as much as 2.5 weeks on a plot. Not always the same one, because if we got stuck, we'd sometimes put it to one side and pick up another one that we were halfway through and try and run with that. But we never really bothered to write the dialogue, as I say, until we'd really got the story worked out in considerable detail. You always have to change it a bit, because you can never visualize it all when you've just got the storyline there, and you'll find that one scene that you'd imagine doesn't work because Basil comes into it in a different frame of mind or in a different mood from what you need. So you're always having to rejig it a bit. But that was the key. We never started until we had the story, so we always knew where we were going. Some people try to write comedy by starting scene one and they start writing the dialogue. Well, the chances of them getting to a satisfactory ending are 1 in 100. You've got to kind of know where you're going while you're building the thing. One of the characteristics of those episodes is that there's always one key idea. But what we often tried to do along with that key idea was to have one or two other subplots, other threads running. And they would run parallel for a time, and then hopefully they would become intertwined. And by the end, the last 5 minutes, they would all come together. That's what we managed to do in the best of the episodes. But the most useful thing we used to do was to ask people for ideas, people who were in the business. For example, Connie and I were on holiday in Monte Carlo for 2 weeks, and we met a very nice woman who was just sort of helping us with the hotel, and we had coffee with her. And we said to her, what's the most difficult kind of guest that you have? And she described Mrs. Richards absolutely perfectly. And we wrote it all down, the fact that they always complain about everything, but they don't want it changed. They just want a reduction. And this business of strategic deafness, hearing what they want to hear. And she just gave us a character portrait. All the BBC shows at that time were always recorded with a live audience. And it was kind of understood that you didn't use any kind of sweetening, you didn't use any kind of canned laughter. We did sometimes, and I'll tell you what we did. Occasionally, you'd have something on film, and the audience would, of course, have to watch that on the monitors, and then that would cut back to the studio, and the audience would still be watching the monitors, and they would fail to see that we were supposed to be back in the studio. And sometimes you would find that there would be a complete silence after a joke because the audience is looking in the wrong place, or they're still looking in the studio when they should be looking up the monitor. And then we used to take one of our own laughs off the soundtrack and put it in the place if it needed it. But I said to the actors very early on, I had a theory about this. I said, we're not going to play this at the pace of the studio audience. I said, we don't have to. In the theatre, you have to go at the pace of the audience because they can't hear you otherwise. You have to wait for that laughter to curve, the laughter curve to come down. Then you start speaking again. But in television, you have this wonderful thing called a microphone that's there. And if you talk into the mic while the audience is still laughing, then the wonderful thing is that people at home can hear it. So you can keep the pace up. And when people are watching at home, there's only one or two of them. It's not like being in an audience in a theatre, so they don't laugh as much. So what you have to do is play it faster when people are, at home in ones and twos than you ever would if you were doing it in front of a full audience. So we deliberately ignored the studio audience and tried to play it faster than was right for the studio audience in order to get the sufficiently rapid pace of the people at home. The second show that we did, which was about the builders, was performed almost entirely to complete silence. And it was not a very comfortable experience. And afterwards, I was a bit disturbed. And people said, no, it was a funny show. Actually, I think it's the least good of the 10 shows, or 12 shows. But, they said, no, it was fine, it was funny. I said, well, what about the audience? And they said, well, we don't know. We found out later that a large number of people from the Icelandic Broadcasting Corporation had visited the BBC that day. And the BBC were always helpful to shows like mine. Thought, wouldn't it be nice if we put all 70 of them in the front row? And they sat there being very pleasant and charming and Icelandic and not laughing at all, just this faint whiff of cod coming from the front row, which had we recognized might have given us the explanation. And I've got to say, it was a pretty tough recording, and it needed quite a lot of editing to tighten it up. But the BBC do things like this to you sometimes. We used to do the entire recording between, let me get it right, between 8 and 10 in the evening. We would get into the studio that day at about 9:30, start in front of cameras at 10 and go through to 6. So they were long days, and I was a lot younger. I mean, I remember for the second series, I got fit. I used to go for runs. It took a lot of energy for two reasons. First of all, it was a big expenditure of energy actually during the course of the show. But the rehearsal, you see, we only had 5 days to get it right. And 5 days was not a great deal to learn it. The first day would be the read-through, and you'd start putting it on its feet. You'd start figuring out, all right, well, Sybil's there and I'm at the desk. The second day, you'd finish putting it on your feet. So you only had 3 days to go to rehearse it. You see what I mean? Then by the third day, little bits of it were beginning to work because people were getting to know the lines. But then you come in for the fourth and fifth days. Usually there was a weekend in the middle which helped because you could spend the whole weekend learning. But then the fourth and fifth days, you were absolutely flat out because there was a great deal to learn, not just the words, but all the business. You have to figure out exactly what the business is and then remember it and practice it so that it's really quick. And Andrew and I, you know, are good at physical comedy, but it was exhausting because there was so much of it to do. The timing is all important, and the hardest thing is to get it well enough rehearsed. Now, 5 days was never really enough, plus the day in the studio, to get it right. And what happened was that we did anything between 20 and 25 hours editing on each show. Almost every minute you see up on the screen, we spent 1 hour editing. And it was only by doing that that you could just tighten it up and just tighten it there and take out a line of dialogue there and sometimes take out a repetition there or then lose 2 lines of dialogue there. That's what really got the pace on it. And there wasn't time to get it that good in terms of just the rehearsal period and the studio recording. It felt to me very much like a team because in the first series, John Howard Davis, second series, Bobby Spears, and Prue, and Andrew and Connie and I listened to each other a great deal. And people, you know, if I was doing a scene with, let's say, with Sybil, with Prue, then Connie and Andrew would just sit there watching, and after a time, they might easily, Andrew might say, what about that? Or that isn't quite working. But because Connie and I had written and then rewritten the scripts, there wasn't an enormous amount of script rewriting. They were more or less right most of the time. But how we did them was very much a cooperative thing with lots of suggestions coming in. And I just did an American show, Third Rock from the Sun, and it was lovely. It was just like Fawlty Towers again, with about 6 key people giving ideas and nobody bothering whether their idea was accepted or not. It was just that sense of making it as good as possible. We saw Basil as someone who was tremendously class conscious, who was always trying to become a little bit grand, who adopted attitudes of superiority over people that were really quite unjustified, and someone who was fundamentally terrified of his wife. So if you look at the episodes, they're almost all fueled by the fact that he is trying to hide something from Sybil. Very, very basic. Sybil, Connie and I had a different conception. I can't remember now, through the mists of time, what it was. But we had a different conception of the character from the way Prue played it at the first read-through. And I remember going home and saying to Connie, what do you think about the way Prue's playing it? And her saying, well, it's not what we thought of. We were a bit worried. And then after about 2 days, we actually saw that what she was doing was better and worked better than the way that we thought it would be played. And so that helped us, because when we came to write the second episode and the rest of them, we began to have her voice in our ear, which we didn't have when we wrote the first one. When we handed the first script in, there were a lot of theoretical questions about, why are they together? And I remember being puzzled by that. I said, I think to Jimmy Gilbert, I said, you look at all your friends, do you have any idea why any of them are together? And he said, no, I suppose not. Sometimes people worry about things like that. When we were writing Fish Called Wanda, we spent ages agonizing over what was Kevin Kline's character, Otto's backstory. Where did he come from? What had he done? It's never mentioned in the film. We never know anything about where he came from, what he used to do. It doesn't bother anyone. So a lot of those questions don't matter. The fact is, most people, as far as I could make out, are married because of some strange historical accident. It is no longer explicable logically, and they were there and they are together, and there's that kind of mutual dependence. Sybil, I think, is much, much stronger and more independent than Basil. She could really function perfectly well if Basil buzzed off or fell under a bus. I don't think Basil could. I think he's much more dependent on Sybil, and that's why he's much more frightened of her than she is of him. Getting Connie's character right was not too difficult because she is the sensible one. But she's also Basil's confidant. When he gets in terrible trouble, he will go to Polly and say, this has happened and this is what I have to achieve. And it's terribly useful as a writing device to have somebody once described her as Horatio to Hamlet. It's wonderful to have someone that the protagonist can go to and say, this is what I have just done and this is what I'm going to do next if there's any doubt about what's happening in the plot. She, in the pilot episode, was a philosophy student. And we didn't feel that worked as well as art students, so we re-recorded just a little, maybe 4 or 5 minutes, and cut that in to the first episode before it was transmitted to the general public. And then Andrew, I'd seen Andrew in a marvelous play by John Mortimer called Habeas Corpus, and he had just made me laugh till I hurt, and I realized how good he was at physical comedy. And so I got him, and this just touched something in him because he's so quiet. He's immensely thoughtful, extraordinarily kind man, very considerate, and rather quiet, almost introverted. And then you put that moustache on him, and it goes ding, and this energy explodes, and it's something just comes through that you don't normally see. And at the beginning, I wrote most of Basil and most of Manuel, and Connie wrote most of Sybil and most of Polly. And I found it very interesting because I'd sometimes suggest lines for Sybil, and she'd say, no, a woman would never say that. And I'd think, But gradually, she started to write more of Basil, and I started to write more of Sybil. And then we just kind of cooperated more and more on all the characters. Then the one the two of us loved the most was the Major. We loved this guy who was in his own world. He never quite understood what was going on, but always added his own insane interpretation of it. And Ballard Berkeley, he's no longer with us. I was hugely fond of him. He was a wonderful fellow. And having had a very distinguished career, it was lovely that right towards the end of it, he had this huge hit. But he was like me, he was an insane cricket fan. And when I'd be in the rehearsal room, playing a scene with Sybil, I'd glance over Sybil's shoulder and I'd suddenly see Ballard doing this, which meant that there was 6 Australian wickets down. And I just loved that man. And then the old ladies were absolutely terrific. And it was a very happy group because everybody was very pleased with what they had to do. Nobody was trying to build their part up. Everyone was happy. So that was good. And then each week you'd have some guests in. And I have to say that John Howard Davies, director of the first series, was marvelous at casting because he came up with Prue and he came up with a lot of the actors that we used in that first series. Basil in Gourmet Night is desperately trying to improve the tone of the hotel. He doesn't want any riffraff there. I love the fact he says in the advertisement, no riffraff. He thinks he could get the cream of Torquay society along and sort of improve his professional chances, perhaps get invited to dinner with some of these people. And he's at his fawning worst. Now, the interesting thing is we decided to get the chef absolutely plastered, and yet shortly after the episode I went to a very good restaurant in Cambridge, and they'd had a similar emergency on their first night, which was they'd been cooking for a certain amount of time and had friends in and so forth, and had trial meals, sort of dress rehearsals, and on the night in question, in the late afternoon, the gas company cut off the gas, because in the excitement and frenzy of opening the restaurant, they'd quite simply forgotten to pay the bill. So that was a neater way of getting to the stage where you don't have any way of cooking the meal properly and how you have to go to the restaurant down the town than the one we came up with. And it's interesting that reality often provides you with the best situations. I mean, in A Fish Called Wanda, the situation where the family walked in and I'm there naked actually more or less happened to my closest friend. He was given the key to a flat in London by an upper-class family who hardly ever used it. And they said, Alan, anytime you're in town, do use the flat. We hardly use it. And about 6 months later, he was going to a black tie thing and he went to the flat dressed there, and then he went back afterwards and poured himself a whiskey and went to have a bath. And after a time, he heard the door open and he didn't bother him at all because it was his friends. And there was a knock on the door, and who is in there? And he said, Alan, and the voice said, Alan who? And he realized he didn't recognize the voice. And of course, the family had sold the flat and not told Alan. The interesting thing about the beating the car sequence is how technical it is. It took a very long time to find a branch that was right. We tried beating it with a fairly rigid branch, and it wasn't funny at all. And we tried beating it with a floppy branch, and that didn't work. And then we finally got a branch that had the right degree of flexibility, and it became terribly funny. And it showed that now, no matter how good an idea is, there's always an enormous amount of getting it right technically, which nobody knows unless they actually do it. People always talk about in the abstract as though any branch would have been funny. Similarly, when he's cursing the car, it is much funny that sound is kind of contained, as though it's coming from inside a sort of goldfish bowl, than if you heard it at full volume from inside the car. And often you don't know why these things are the case, and you just have to stumble around trying things until you discover what works.
So difficult for you to start. I mean, it's so basic. If you don't go, there's no point in having you. Just pull yourself together, all right? Make an effort. Come on. Now look.
Mr. Fawlty! Mr. Fawlty! Mr. Fawlty! Telephone.
What?
Telephone. Telephone.
Where's Sybil?
Okay.
Where's Sybil?
Where's the bill?
No, not my bill. I own the place. I don't pay bills. Where's my wife?
She's not here.
She is there. Oh, never mind. Right, leave it to me. I'll do it. I'll mend the car and answer the telephone and you can change it.
In here.
Yes, I know it's...
This way?
Yes, I know it's this way. I own the place.
Hello, Fawlty Towers. Oh, Andre, thank you for calling. Kurt's marvellous. We're absolutely delighted with him. Really, Andre, he's wonderful.
This Basil's wife. This Basil. This smack on head.
Just one minute, Andre. Basil?
Yes, dear?
Have you taken the car in yet?
Yes, I'm just dealing with it, dear.
You're not trying to do it yourself, are you, Basil?
Oh, have you seen this mark up here, dear?
Did you hear what I said?
Yes, I did, dear. It's a bit of a scratch.
Take it into the garage, Basil.
Yes, just having a look at it, dear.
Sorry, Andre, where was I? Oh, yes, well, he's the best chef we've ever had. We can't thank you enough for finding him for us.